My daughter sent me a text message that read simply, "We want to have a peaceful Christmas with our in-laws, so please do not come this year." I stared at the screen and typed back 2 words. "Enjoy yourselves." They did not know that I had just finalized the purchase of the most expensive estate in the state. They did not know I had invited everyone else, including their bosses, to my new villa. When they saw the photos on social media, they broke into my home in a rage. That was the moment I destroyed them completely. If you are watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you are listening to my story of justice from. I want to know how far it traveled. I stood in the long checkout line at the toy store holding a limited edition Lego Millennium Falcon that cost $500. It was a ridiculous amount of money for a box of plastic bricks, but my grandson Leo had been talking about it for months. At 7 years old, Leo was the only pure thing left in my life. I pulled out a wad of cash from my worn leather wallet. To the cashier and the impatient people behind me, I looked like just another retiree in a faded coat, counting out his pension. I liked it that way. Invisibility was a power I had cultivated for 5 years since I sold Blackwood Logistics for $120 million. My phone buzzed in my pocket just as the cashier handed me the receipt. It was a text from Brittany, my only daughter. I stepped aside to read it, expecting a time confirmation for Christmas dinner. Instead, I read the words that would sever our relationship forever. The message was long and performative. It said, "Dad, we have been thinking. Jason's parents, the Whitmores, are coming this year. They are very particular about atmosphere, and frankly, they prefer a more upscale and private environment. We think it would be best if you stayed home this year. You know how you get uncomfortable around them, and we do not want any awkwardness. We will drop by next week to exchange gifts. Love you." I read the message twice. I did not feel sadness. I felt a cold, hard clarity settle in my chest. It was the same feeling I used to get in the boardroom right before I hostilely took over a competitor. They were ashamed of me. They wanted to play the part of the wealthy, successful couple for the Whitmores, and my presence in my 10-year-old Ford and off-the-rack clothes would ruin their tableau. I looked at the expensive toy in my hands. Next week. She said she would drop by next week. She was not even going to let me give Leo his gift on Christmas morning. I walked out of the store into the biting December wind. I did not reply to the text. I got into my car and drove. I did not drive to my apartment. I drove straight to Brittany and Jason's house. I needed to see them. I needed to see the house that I had paid for. I parked 2 houses down because I knew Jason hated seeing my old sedan in his driveway. I walked up to the porch holding the large gift bag. I intended to leave it on the doorstep and walk away like a ghost. But the living room window was cracked open just an inch to let out the heat from the fireplace. Voices drifted out into the cold night air. I stopped. I recognized the shrill laugh of Mrs. Whitmore. They had arrived early. I moved closer to the window, my back pressed against the siding of the house I had secretly refinanced 3 times to save them from foreclosure. "Thank God you told him not to come," Mrs. Whitmore was saying. Her voice was loud and grating. "The last time we were here, he wore that moth-eaten coat and smelled like Old Spice. It was embarrassing to introduce him to our friends at the club. He looks like a janitor." I waited for Brittany to defend me. I waited for my daughter, the girl I had raised alone after her mother died, to say something about my character or my kindness. Brittany laughed. It was a nervous, trying to please laugh. "Don't worry, Mom. I told him we needed space. Honestly, I was afraid he would ask for money again. He has been complaining about inflation eating into his pension lately. It is so draining to deal with his poverty mentality." I stood frozen on the porch. I had never asked her for a dime. In fact, every time she complained about a bill, I would slip an envelope of cash into her purse when she wasn't looking and pretend I had found it or saved it. Then I heard Jason's voice, my son-in-law, the man who drove a BMW I had paid off anonymously last year. He spoke with a mouth full of food. You know, babe, we need to talk about his apartment after the holidays. It is a waste of equity. If we convince him to sell it and move into that state-subsidized nursing home on Elm Street, we could use the proceeds to invest in my company. We could tell him it is for his own safety. He is getting old and senile anyway. The Lego box in my hand felt heavy as lead. Senile. They thought I was senile because I didn't correct them when they lied. They thought I was poor because I chose not to be flashy. And now they were planning to liquidate my life to fund their delusions of grandeur. I looked through the slit in the curtains. I saw them raising glasses of champagne. Expensive champagne. I saw the tree piled high with gifts. I saw my grandson Leo sitting in the corner playing on an iPad, ignoring them all. I did not kick down the door. I did not scream. I gently set the Lego set down on the doormat. I turned around and walked back to my car. The Conrad Blackwood, who was a soft father, died on that porch. The Conrad Blackwood, who was a ruthless CEO, woke up. I drove back to my apartment complex. It was a modest brick building in a working-class neighborhood. Inside my unit was clean and simple. I locked the door and went straight to the bedroom closet. I pushed aside the old coats and shirts. I pulled out a small key from a hidden pocket in my belt. I knelt down and pulled up a loose floorboard in the corner, revealing a wall safe installed behind the drywall. I dialed the combination. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, there were no stacks of small bills or sentimental trinkets. There were stacks of financial dossiers bound in leather folders. I pulled out the thickest one labeled Project Parasite. I sat at my kitchen table and opened it. It was a detailed record of every cent I had spent on Brittany and Jason over the last 5 years. I turned the pages, my finger tracing the rows of numbers. Mortgage payments totaling $240,000 paid through a shell company called Angel Wing Trust. They thought they had won a housing grant. It was me. Credit card payoffs totaling $50,000 paid by an anonymous donor. That was me. The seed capital for Jason's failing tech startup, $100,000. That was me. I looked at the total at the bottom of the spreadsheet. $412,000 in 5 years. Nearly $500,000 funneled into their lives to keep them afloat, to keep them looking successful, to keep them happy. And in return, they banned me from Christmas and plotted to put me in a state home. I closed the folder. The sadness was gone. It was replaced by a cold, tactical fury. I reached for my secure satellite phone, the one I kept for high-level business dealings. I dialed a number I had not called in 6 months. Sarah O'Connor answered on the second ring. She was the sharpest attorney in New York and the only person who knew the full extent of my wealth. "Conrad," she said. Her voice was professional but surprised. "It is late. Is everything all right?" "Everything is finally clear, Sarah," I said. My voice was steady. "I am activating the winter campaign. I want you to purchase the Summit." There was a pause on the line. The Summit was the most exclusive estate in the city, a $25 million mansion on the highest hill overlooking the entire valley. It had been on the market for 2 weeks. The Summit. Sarah repeated, "You want to buy it?" "I want to buy it tonight," I said. "Cash offer. 20% above asking price for immediate possession. I want the keys in my hand by tomorrow morning." "And Sarah, there is one more thing." "Yes, Conrad." "Cut the feed," I said. "Terminate the Angel Wing Trust payments immediately. Cancel the credit card guarantees. Freeze the investment capital in Jason's company. I want every financial IV drip pulled out of their arms tonight." "Are you sure, Conrad?" Sarah asked softly. "This will ruin them. They have no liquidity. They are living on your artificial life support." I looked at the photo of Brittany on my wall. She was smiling at her graduation, a graduation I paid for by working double shifts before my company took off. "I am sure," I said. "They want privacy. I will give them the privacy of poverty. Do it. I hung up the phone. I poured myself a glass of tap water and sat in the dark. I waited. I knew the fallout would not be immediate. It would take a few hours for the systems to update, for the cards to decline, for the reality to set in. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Brittany. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I put on my best, tired old man voice. "Hello, Brittany," I said. "Hi, Dad," she said. Her voice was sickly sweet. It was the voice she used when she wanted something. "I noticed you dropped off Leo's gift. That was sweet. You didn't have to run off so fast. We would have said hello." "I heard you were busy," I said. "I didn't want to intrude on your upscale environment." She laughed, a nervous tinkling sound. "Oh, Dad, don't be silly. Don't. Listen, the reason I am calling is, well, we have a small situation. Jason went to pick up the catering order for the Christmas Eve party tonight, and there was a glitch with his card. The bank is being so annoying with their fraud protection algorithms during the holidays." I stared at the wall. The cutoff had begun. "That is unfortunate," I said. "Yes, it is," she continued quickly. "So we are a little stuck. The caterer needs payment now to release the food. It is the Whitmore's favorite seafood place. It is about $5,000. I know things are tight for you, but do you think you could maybe dip into your emergency savings just for a few days? Jason will pay you back with interest as soon as the bank sorts out this glitch." $5,000. She was asking me for $5,000 to pay for a party I was explicitly banned from attending. The audacity was breathtaking. She wanted me to finance my own exclusion. I leaned back in my chair. "Brittany," I said slowly, "I checked my accounts this morning. I am afraid I have nothing to spare. Inflation, you know. It eats into everything." There was a silence. Then her tone shifted. It lost the sweetness. It became sharp and entitled. "Dad, are you serious? This is Christmas. This is for your family. You have that savings account Mom left. I know you do. You are just being spiteful because we asked for one night of privacy." "I am not being spiteful," I said. "I am being realistic. I cannot afford your lifestyle, Brittany. And frankly, I do not think you can either." She exploded. "You are so selfish. You sit in that ugly apartment hoarding money while we try to build a future. You know what? Fine. If you don't want to help family, then don't expect to be treated like family. Do not bother coming by next week. You are not seeing Leo until you learn to be less toxic." She hung up. The line went dead. She had played her final card. She used my grandson as a weapon. She thought it would break me. She thought I would call back, begging, transferring the money, apologizing for existing. She did not know that she had just severed the last thread of mercy I held for her. I put the phone down on the table. My hand did not shake. I stood up and walked to the window. The snow was starting to fall. It was going to be a white Christmas. My phone buzzed again. It was Sarah. "The deed is done, Conrad," she texted. "The summit is yours. The keys are with the security team at the gate. The transfer of funds has been executed. The support accounts for Brittany and Jason are closed. The notifications will start hitting them within the hour." I typed back, "Excellent. Send out the invitations." "What invitations?" Sarah asked. I smiled a cold, grim smile. "Everyone, Sarah. I want you to invite the mayor. I want you to invite the city council. I want you to invite Jason's boss, Mr. Sterling. I want you to invite the president of the bank that holds Brittany's mortgage. I want you to invite every neighbor on Brittany's street. I want you to invite her old college friends. Invite the whole town." "Except them," Sarah asked. "Except them," I confirmed. "And Sarah, make sure the invitations are gold-plated. I want this to be the event of the decade." I packed a single bag. I left my old coat on the hook. I put on a bespoke Italian wool suit, that I had kept in the back of the closet for 5 years. I put on my Swiss watch. I walked out of the apartment and locked the door. I got into my car and drove toward the hills. As I drove, I passed Brittany's neighborhood. I saw the lights on her house. I imagined the panic starting to set in as the catering order was canceled, as the credit cards were declined one by one. I drove up the winding private road to the summit. The iron gates swung open automatically, recognizing my arrival. The mansion stood at the top of the hill, glowing like a palace. It had 12 bedrooms, a ballroom, a wine cellar, and a view that stretched to the horizon. Staff were already there, hired by Sarah. They were hanging lights, preparing food, setting up a Christmas tree that was 20 feet tall. "Welcome home, Mr. Blackwood," the head butler said, bowing as I entered the marble foyer. "Thank you, James," I said. "Let's get to work. We have a party to throw." The next 24 hours were a blur of calculated extravagance. I spent money like a weapon. I ordered cases of vintage wine. I hired a string quartet and a jazz band. I hired a Michelin star chef to prepare a feast. By Christmas Eve, the mansion was a beacon of light on the hill. The guests started arriving at 7 o'clock. Luxury cars lined the long driveway. I stood on the balcony holding a glass of scotch, watching them arrive. I saw the mayor shaking hands with the police chief. I saw Jason's boss, Mr. Sterling, laughing with his wife. I saw Brittany's neighbors staring up at the high ceilings in awe. They all knew me as the quiet old man from the apartment complex. Now they were seeing Conrad Blackwood, the legend. The whispers started immediately. "Is that Conrad? I thought he was broke. He owns this place. My God, look at that suit." I mingled with the guests, playing the part of the gracious host. I was charming. I was witty. I dropped subtle hints about my past, about the company I sold, about the investments I managed. I watched the realization dawn on their faces. They realized they had underestimated me. But my eyes were constantly on the large monitors in the security room, which streamed to my phone. I was waiting. I knew they would come. Down in the valley, chaos was consuming Brittany's house. I knew this because Mrs. Parker, Brittany's nosy neighbor, who was currently eating my shrimp cocktail, had told me. "Oh, Conrad, it is a shame Brittany isn't here," Mrs. Parker had said, her eyes gleaming with gossip. "I went over to show her the invitation you sent me. It was so beautiful, gold-plated and all. She looked like she was going to be sick. She said you must have stolen it or something." She was frantic. Her caterer never showed up because the payment failed. Her mother-in-law was screaming at Jason. It sounded like a war zone. I smiled and took a sip of my drink. "I hope they work it out," I said smoothly. At 8:30, my phone alerted me. Security camera 2 at the main gate. A car had pulled up. It was Jason's BMW. It looked small and dirty next to the limousines and sports cars parked along the drive. Brittany jumped out of the car. She was wearing a red dress, but her hair was messy, and her face was twisted in rage. Jason followed her, looking pale and sweaty. The Whitmores were in the back seat, looking furious. I watched on my phone as Brittany screamed at the security guard. "Do you know who I am?" she yelled. "I am Conrad Blackwood's daughter. Open this gate right now. This is ridiculous. My father does not live here. He lives in a dump. He must be working here as a waiter or something." The security guard, a large man named Mike, who I had briefed personally, stepped forward. He held a clipboard. "I am sorry, ma'am," Mike said, his voice calm but loud enough to be picked up by the microphone. "Your name is not on the guest list. In fact, Mr. Blackwood gave us a specific list of people who are barred from the premises. You, Jason Whitmore, and the elder Whitmores are at the top of that list." "You are lying," she shrieked. She tried to push past him. Mike blocked her path. "Ma'am, if you do not leave, I will have to call the police. This is private property." Brittany looked up at the house. She saw the lights. She saw the people on the balcony. She saw the opulence. And then she saw me. I stepped out onto the front terrace directly above the gate. I was illuminated by the outdoor spotlights. I raised my glass to her. She froze. She saw the suit. She saw the confidence. She saw the father she had dismissed as a failure, standing as the king of the hill. "Dad," she screamed. "Dad, let us in. There has been a mistake. The bank cut us off. We have no food. The Whitmores are here. Stop this joke." I did not say a word. I simply turned my back and walked inside. I knew they wouldn't leave. Their pride wouldn't let them. The Whitmores wouldn't let them. They were humiliated, and they were broke. They needed to get in not just for the party, but to reclaim control. I watched the monitor. Jason and Brittany were arguing. Then I saw them move the car to a dark patch of the road. They were going to try to sneak in. They were going to climb the side fence near the service entrance. It was exactly what I had anticipated. I had left that section of the fence unmonitored by guards, but heavily monitored by cameras. Inside the ballroom, the party was in full swing. Jason's boss, Mr. Sterling, approached me. "Conrad." I had no idea, he said, shaking my hand. "Jason never mentioned you were, well, this." I smiled. "Jason doesn't know much about my business dealings, Mr. Sterling. I prefer to keep my family life and my financial life separate. Although I am concerned about Jason. I hear he has been having some liquidity issues." Sterling frowned. "Liquidity issues. That is concerning. He handles significant accounts for us. If he is unstable..." I let the sentence hang. I didn't need to say more. The seed was planted. Suddenly, the side doors to the ballroom burst open. The music stopped. The chatter died down. There they were, Brittany, Jason, and the Whitmores. But they did not look like guests. They looked like intruders. Brittany's dress was torn at the hem from climbing the fence. Jason had mud on his knees. Mrs. Whitmore had lost a shoe. They looked deranged. "Dad," Brittany screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. Her voice echoed off the high ceilings. Everyone turned to stare. "What is wrong with you?" she yelled, marching into the center of the room. "You invite the whole town, but you ban your own daughter. You hide all this money while we struggle. You let my son, your grandson, go without a Christmas dinner while you feed strangers lobster. You are a monster." She grabbed a glass of wine from a waiter's tray and threw it on the floor. It shattered. Red wine splattered across the white marble floor. The guests gasped. I stood on the grand staircase looking down at them. I did not look angry. I looked disappointed. "Brittany," I said, my voice calm but amplified by the acoustics of the room. "You are not here because you are struggling. You are here because you are greedy." "Liar," she screamed. "We have always been there for you. We visited your dirty apartment. We let you be part of our lives, and you lied to us. You pretended to be poor to test us. That is sick." I signaled to the AV technician I had hired. "I didn't pretend anything, Brittany," I said. "I simply didn't correct your assumptions. And as for struggling, let us look at the truth." The massive LED screen behind me, which had been displaying winter landscapes, suddenly changed. It displayed a spreadsheet. A giant high-definition spreadsheet. It was the Project Parasite file. The room went silent. "These are the mortgage payments for your house," I said, pointing to the screen. $4,000 a month for 5 years. Paid by me. The screen changed. It showed a credit card statement. "This is your credit card bill from last month," I said. $50,000. Mostly designer handbags and spa treatments. Paid by me." The screen changed again. It showed a bank transfer. "This is the $200,000 debt Jason incurred gambling online," I said, looking at Jason. He turned gray. "Paid by me to keep him out of jail." The guests were whispering furiously now. "Mr. Sterling." Jason's boss stepped forward, his face hard. "Gambling debt," he muttered. 200,000. And finally I said, "The audio recording." I pressed a button on a remote. My voice was not on the recording. It was Jason and Brittany's voices recorded from the night before through the open window. The audio was crisp and clear. Jason's voice boomed through the speakers. "If we convince him to sell it and move into that state-subsidized nursing home on Elm Street, we could use the proceeds to invest in my company. He is getting old and senile anyway." Brittany's voice followed. I was afraid he would ask for money again. It is so draining to deal with his poverty mentality. The recording ended. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. I looked at the Whitmores. They were shrinking away from Brittany and Jason, trying to distance themselves from the shame. "This," I said quietly, "is why I need space. I do not want to be infected by your greed." Brittany stood in the center of the room, trembling. She looked around at the faces of her neighbors, her friends, her husband's boss. She saw no sympathy. She saw only disgust. You set us up," she whispered. "I did not set you up," I replied. "I just turned on the lights." "Security," I said. Mike and his team moved in. They did not use force, but their presence was intimidating. "Please escort these trespassers off the property. And call the police. Breaking and entering is a crime." Jason's boss, Mr. Sterling, stepped into Jason's path as he tried to slink away. "Do not bother coming in on Monday," Jason Sterling said. "You are fired, and we will be auditing every account you ever touched. If I find 1 cent missing, I will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law." Jason collapsed to his knees. Brittany looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. "Dad," she pleaded. "Dad, please. We have nothing. The house, the payments. The payments have stopped, Brittany," I said. "You wanted to be independent. You wanted privacy. Now you have it." "But Leo," she cried. "You are punishing Leo." I walked down the stairs until I was face to face with her. "Leo is the only reason I am not pressing charges for the fraud you committed against me over the years," I said. "I have set up a trust for him. He will access it when he is 21, provided he does not live under your roof." "What?" she gasped. "I have already filed for custody," I said. My lawyer, Sarah, stepped forward, handing Brittany a thick envelope. "You are unfit," I said. "You are financially unstable. You are morally bankrupt. And you are on tape plotting to harm a senior citizen. No judge will let you keep him. Get out." Brittany screamed a primal sound of defeat. Mike took her arm and led her out. Jason followed, sobbing. The Whitmores scuttled out behind them, heads bowed, not daring to look anyone in the eye. The heavy oak doors slammed shut. I turned back to the room. I took a deep breath. I adjusted my cufflinks. "I apologize for the interruption, everyone," I said. "Please do not let the trash ruin the party." The dessert bar is now open. The band struck up a lively jazz tune. The guests hesitated for a moment, then applause broke out. It started slow, then grew thunderous. They cheered, they toasted me. I walked out onto the balcony alone. The snow was falling harder now, covering the world in a clean white blanket. I took a sip of my scotch. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Brittany. "Dad, I am so sorry. We made a mistake. Please, we are cold. We are locked out of our house. Please help us." I looked at the message. I looked at the snow falling on the vast estate that was now my home. I pressed the block button. The screen went black. I finished my drink. It was the best Christmas I had ever had. I sat in the darkness of my small kitchen, the only illumination coming from the glow of my laptop screen. The digital clock in the corner of the display read 11:42 p.m. My finger hovered over the enter key. On the screen was a wire transfer authorization form from my private holding company in Zurich. The amount was staggering to the average person, $25 million, but to me it was simply the cost of ammunition. This was not a purchase. It was a declaration of war. I pressed the key. The screen refreshed. Transaction complete. Just like that, the deed to the summit. The estate on the hill that loomed over our town like a castle was mine. The previous owners, a tech mogul and his wife who were divorcing, had been desperate for a cash buyer who could close in 24 hours. They didn't care that the buyer was a shell corporation named Nemesis Holdings. They just wanted the money. And I had plenty of it. I picked up my secure phone. Sarah O'Connor was still on the line, her breathing steady. She was the only person in the world who knew that the old man driving the 2010 Ford Taurus was actually the silent majority shareholder in 3 of the state's largest logistics firms. "The funds have cleared," Sarah said, her voice crisp and professional. "The title is being transferred electronically as we speak. The security codes for the main gate and the smart home system have been sent to your encrypted email. The staff has been retained and briefed. They are expecting Mr. Blackwood, the philanthropist, not Mr. Blackwood, the poor retiree." "Excellent," I replied. "Now for the second part. Execute the kill switch on the support accounts." I could hear the clicking of her keyboard. This was the part that required surgical precision. For 5 years, I had set up an elaborate financial ecosystem to support Brittany and Jason without them ever knowing it was me. I knew Jason's ego was too fragile to accept money from his father-in-law, and Brittany was too proud to admit she needed it. So I had created the Angel Wing Trust. To them, it was a faceless, charitable organization that had awarded them a housing grant. To me, it was a direct line from my bank account to their mortgage lender. "Done," Sarah said. "The automatic mortgage payment scheduled for the 1st of the month has been canceled. The notification will be sent to their lender in the morning. They will be in default within 10 days. "Keep going," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I am accessing the credit card guarantees," Sarah continued. "You co-signed for their Platinum American Express cards through a limited liability company 3 years ago. I am withdrawing the guarantee and freezing the credit lines. The cards are now effectively pieces of plastic." "And the investment?" I asked. This was the big one. Jason believed he was a business genius because a venture capital firm had injected $200,000 into his failing marketing consultancy. He didn't know that the venture capital firm was just me sitting in this kitchen, moving money from one pocket to another to keep him from going bankrupt. "I am pulling the term sheet," Sarah said. There was a pause. "Conrad, the contract allows us to recall the loan immediately if there is a change in the guarantor's status. I am triggering that clause. His business accounts will be frozen until the debt is repaid. He will wake up tomorrow with 0 operating capital." "Good," I said. "Let them feel the cold." I hung up the phone and closed the laptop. I stood up and looked around the apartment. I had lived here for 7 years. It was clean, functional, and modest. It was the perfect camouflage. But looking at it now, I realized it was also a prison I had built for myself. I had stayed small so my daughter wouldn't feel small. I had dimmed my light so Jason wouldn't feel overshadowed. And they had thanked me by treating me like a stain on their perfect life. I went to the bedroom and packed my single suitcase. I took the photo of Brittany off the nightstand. It was from her 5th birthday. She was missing a front tooth and smiling up at me as if I were Superman. I looked at it for a long moment, trying to find that little girl inside the woman who had just banned me from Christmas. I couldn't find her. I placed the photo face down on the empty bed. I walked out of the apartment, leaving the key under the mat. I got into my car. The engine sputtered as it started a noise that usually annoyed me but tonight sounded like a victory cry. I wasn't going back to the apartment. I was ascending. While I drove toward the hills, the financial shockwaves of my phone call with Sarah were beginning to hit their targets. It was a Friday night, the peak of the holiday season. Brittany and Jason were out trying to impress Jason's parents, the Whitmores. I knew exactly where they were because I still had access to the transaction alerts on the credit cards I backed. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Transaction declined. Location, the Gilded Oyster. Amount $842. I smiled. They were at the most expensive seafood restaurant in town. I could picture the scene perfectly. Jason puffed up with arrogance, trying to play the big shot for his parents. He would have ordered the seafood tower, the expensive wine, maybe a round of aged cognac. In the restaurant, the waiter would have returned to the table holding the card with 2 fingers, a polite but pitying smile on his face. "I'm sorry, sir," the waiter would say loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "The card has been declined." Jason would laugh, a nervous braying sound. "That's impossible," he would say. "I have a $50,000 limit. Try it again. The chip is probably dirty." The waiter would try it again, and again, and then he would lean in and whisper, "Sir, the bank says the account has been frozen by the guarantor. Do you have another form of payment?" Jason didn't have another form of payment. His personal debit card was overdrawn because he had spent his paycheck on a new watch to impress his father. Brittany's cards were all linked to the same frozen guarantee. My phone buzzed again. Transaction declined. Location, the Gilded Oyster. Amount $842. Attempt 3. Panic would be setting in now. Mrs. Whitmore would be sighing, tapping her manicured fingernails on the table. Mr. Whitmore would be checking his watch, wondering why his son, the successful entrepreneur, couldn't pay for dinner. Brittany would be digging through her purse looking for cash she didn't have because she always relied on the cards. Eventually, Mr. Whitmore would have to pay. He would pull out his wallet with a groan, muttering about responsibility and how in his day a man paid his debts. Jason would shrink into his chair, humiliated, his ears burning red. He would check his banking app on his phone, frantically refreshing the screen, seeing the red letters, account frozen, contact guarantor. He wouldn't understand. He didn't know who the guarantor was. He thought it was the venture capital firm. He would be trying to call his business partner, who wouldn't answer, because I had already instructed Sarah to cut all communications. I turned the car onto the private road leading to the summit. The air was thinner up here, cleaner. The city lights were a carpet of diamonds spread out below me. I approached the massive iron gates. A security camera turned, focusing on my license plate. The gates groaned and swung open. I drove up the winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees wrapped in thousands of white Christmas lights. The house came into view. It was a masterpiece of stone and glass, glowing warmly against the dark sky. It looked like power. It looked like vengeance. I parked my old Ford right in front of the grand entrance next to the fountain. A man in a uniform stepped out of the shadows. It was the head of the private security firm Sarah had hired. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, opening my car door. "Welcome home. We have completed the perimeter sweep. The staff is inside preparing the master suite." "Thank you," I said, stepping out onto the gravel. My phone buzzed again. A text from Brittany. "Dad, are you there? Weird question, but do you have any cash at the apartment? Jason's bank is having a system error, and we are stuck at the gas station. The pump won't take our cards. We need gas to get home." I stared at the message. They had left the restaurant humiliated, only to find they couldn't even fuel their luxury car to get back to their suburban fortress. They were stranded, and her first instinct after banning me from her life was to use me as an ATM. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't apologize for the earlier text. She just wanted cash. She assumed I was sitting in my armchair waiting for her command. I typed a reply. "I am afraid I am not at the apartment, Brittany. I decided to go out." 3 dots appeared. She was typing furiously. "Go out. Go out where you never go out at night. Dad, this is an emergency. We are literally stuck. The Whitmores are in the back seat. It is freezing. Just tell me where the spare key is. I will go to your place and check your emergency jar. She wanted to raid my cookie jar, the jar where I kept $50 bills for groceries. She felt entitled to break into my home and take my money because she had failed to manage hers. I did not reply. I slipped the phone into my pocket. I walked up the stone steps to the kitchen and the massive double doors of my new home. The butler, a man I had hired an hour ago, opened them. The foyer was breathtaking. Marble floors, a chandelier that cost more than Jason's car, and a dual staircase that curved up to the second floor. "Would you like a drink, sir?" the butler asked. "A scotch," I said. "The oldest bottle we have. And bring it to the balcony." I walked through the house, my footsteps echoing on the marble. I passed the dining room with its table for 20. I passed the library with its floor-to-ceiling shelves. I walked out onto the rear balcony. The wind was cold, but I didn't feel it. Below me, the city twinkled. Somewhere down there in the maze of lights, my daughter was arguing with a gas station attendant, her credit cards useless plastic rectangles. Her husband was sweating in the driver's seat, listening to his father lecture him about financial planning. They were feeling the first bite of the winter I had unleashed. And this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, the eviction notice for their house would be generated. The car leasing company would receive the notification that the surety bond had been withdrawn. The house of cards I had built for them was collapsing card by card. The butler appeared with a crystal glass of amber liquid. I took it. To family, I whispered to the night air, raising the glass. I took a sip. It burned pleasantly. My phone buzzed one more time. It was an email notification from my bank. Transfer successful, $5,000 to event planning escrow. The party was paid for. The invitations were being printed at a 24-hour luxury print shop downtown. They would be delivered by courier in the morning. I looked down at the city. I imagined the look on Mrs. Parker's face when she opened her door tomorrow and received a gold-plated invitation to the summit. I imagined her running across the lawn to show Brittany. I imagined the confusion, the denial, and then the slow, creeping realization. Brittany thought she had punished me by excluding me. She didn't realize that she had just freed me. She had freed me from the guilt of hiding my success. She had freed me from the burden of propping up her failures. I was Conrad Blackwood. I built an empire from a single truck. I had negotiated with sharks and broken unions. I had forgotten who I was for a while, trying to be a gentle old grandfather. But the wolf was back, and the wolf was hungry. I turned back to the warm glow of the mansion. I had a lot of work to do before the guests arrived. I needed to make sure everything was perfect. After all, this wasn't just a Christmas party. It was a funeral for their greed. The morning sun did not bring warmth to Brittany's house. It only illuminated the wreckage of the previous night. The kitchen was silent, save for the aggressive humming of the refrigerator. Jason sat at the island, his head in his hands, surrounded by a fortress of unpaid bills and a cell phone that had become nothing more than a receiver for bad news. His business accounts were locked. His personal lines of credit had vanished. He looked like a man who had woken up to find the gravity in his world had suddenly tripled. Brittany was pacing. She hadn't slept. Her makeup from the disastrous dinner was smeared beneath her eyes, and she was still wearing her jewelry, as if taking it off would admit that the glamour she projected was finally dead. In the guest room, the elder Whitmores were stirring. The sound of their footsteps overhead was like the ticking of a bomb. They hadn't spoken to Brittany since the humiliation at the restaurant, but the silent judgment radiating from the guest suite was heavy enough to crush the drywall. Then the noise started outside. It wasn't the usual Saturday morning sound of lawnmowers or kids playing. It was the synchronized slamming of heavy doors. Brittany went to the window, pulling back the curtain with a twitchy, nervous hand. A fleet of black Mercedes Sprinter vans had descended upon the cul-de-sac. They were sleek, unmarked, and moved with military precision. Uniformed men in white gloves were stepping out carrying boxes wrapped in midnight blue velvet. They weren't delivering packages to just one house. They were walking up every single driveway on the street. Every driveway except hers. Brittany frowned, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. "What is going on?" she muttered. "Is someone filming a movie?" She watched as her neighbor across the street, Mrs. Gable, opened her door. The courier actually bowed, and handed her the blue box. Mrs. Gable opened it right there on the porch. Even from across the street, Brittany saw the flash of gold. Mrs. Gable's hand flew to her mouth. She looked around, spotted the courier walking to the next house, and then looked directly at Brittany's window. She didn't wave. She just stared, confused, clutching the box to her chest, like it was a diamond necklace. A sharp knock at the front door made Brittany jump. She smoothed her dress, checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, and put on the mask of the perfect suburban hostess. She opened the door. It was Mrs. Parker from next door. Mrs. Parker was the neighborhood gossip, a woman who weaponized politeness. She was holding one of the blue velvet boxes. "Good morning, Brittany," Mrs. Parker chirped, her eyes darting past Brittany to see if the Whitmores were visible. "I am so sorry to intrude so early, but I just had to come over. I assumed you would be awake getting ready for the big night." Brittany forced a smile. "The big night, Mrs. Parker, we are just having a quiet family Christmas. My in-laws are here." Mrs. Parker's eyebrows shot up. "Quiet? Oh, honey, you are such a kidder. I'm talking about the gala. At the summit." She held out the box. "Look at this. I have never seen anything like it in my life. The courier said it's real gold plating." Brittany looked down. The box was lined with white silk. Resting inside was a heavy rectangular plate of metal engraved with elegant calligraphy. It caught the morning light and threw it back into Brittany's eyes. "You are cordially invited to a Christmas Eve celebration. Location, the Summit Estate. Host, Mr. Conrad Blackwood." Brittany stopped breathing. The world tilted on its axis. She read the name again. Conrad Blackwood. Not Dad. Not the old man in the apartment. Conrad Blackwood, formatted like royalty. "My father," she whispered. Her voice sounded thin, foreign. This has to be a mistake. My father lives in the Briarwood complex. He doesn't live at the summit. Nobody lives at the summit. It's been empty for months." Mrs. Parker laughed a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Brittany, you are so secretive. The whole town is buzzing. Apparently he bought it yesterday. Cash. The mayor tweeted about it an hour ago. He's calling it the return of the Blackwood Empire. I didn't even know your father was that Conrad Blackwood. I thought he was, well, you know, retired." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "So tell me, what are you wearing? Is it black tie? The invitation says formal opulence, but I wasn't sure if that meant long gowns or cocktail dresses. I assume you have something custom-made." Brittany felt the blood drain from her face. She looked past Mrs. Parker to the street. The couriers were moving efficiently. The Johnsons were getting a box. The Millers were getting a box. Even the cranky old man at the end of the cul-de-sac was holding a gold plate and grinning. Brittany stammered. "I haven't checked the mail yet." "Oh, they aren't mailing them, dear," Mrs. Parker said, her eyes narrowing slightly as she scanned Brittany's empty porch. "They are hand-delivering them to the guest list," and the implication hung in the cold air between them. To the guest list. Just then, Mrs. Whitmore appeared in the hallway behind Brittany. She was wearing a silk robe and a scowl that could curdle milk. "Who is at the door, Brittany?" Mrs. Whitmore demanded. "And why is there a van blocking the driveway? We need to go to the bank and sort out this incompetence with Jason's accounts." Mrs. Parker's eyes widened. "Oh, hello, you must be Jason's mother. I'm Gladys Parker. I was just showing Brittany the invitation. Isn't it marvelous? Your in-law certainly knows how to make a statement. Mrs. Whitmore stepped onto the porch, ignoring the cold. She snatched the heavy gold plate from Mrs. Parker's hands. She read it. Her eyes, usually small and critical, grew round. She ran her thumb over the engraved letters. The Summit. Mrs. Whitmore asked, her voice trembling with a mix of greed and fury. Conrad Blackwood, Brittany's father. The one and only, Mrs. Parker beamed. I honestly didn't think he had it in him. He's always so quiet. But I guess that's how the billionaires do it, right? Stealth wealth. Mrs. Whitmore turned her head slowly to look at Brittany. The look was not one of pride. It was one of pure, unadulterated accusation. Brittany, Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice dangerously low. You told me your father was a charity case. You told me he was an embarrassment. You said we couldn't invite him because he would ruin the aesthetic. He is, Brittany cried, panic rising in her throat. He drives a 2010 Ford. He wears clothes from the thrift store. This is some kind of prank. He must have spent his entire savings on this, just to spite me. He's crazy, Gladys. He's losing his mind. Mrs. Parker took her invitation back, looking offended. Well, I don't know about crazy, dear, but the courier did say that the valet service starts at 7. And I saw the catering trucks going up the hill earlier. 3 of them. From Le Petit Chef. That's not a prank. That's a budget. Mrs. Parker stepped back off the porch, clutching her golden ticket. Anyway, I should let you get ready. I'm sure you have a million things to do as the hostess's daughter. See you tonight. She walked away, leaving a silence so profound it felt physical. Brittany stood there, shivering in her thin dress. She looked at the empty spot on her doormat, where a blue velvet box should have been. There was nothing, not even a card. Mrs. Whitmore grabbed Brittany's arm. Her grip was bruising. Inside, now. They marched into the kitchen. Jason looked up, startled by his mother's entrance. Look at this, Mrs. Whitmore hissed, shoving her phone into Jason's face. She had pulled up the town's local newsfeed. Breaking mystery buyer of the Summit revealed as local philanthropist Conrad Blackwood. Gala tonight, expected to draw state officials and business elite. The photo showed the mansion. Lights were blazing from every window. Staff were hanging wreaths the size of car tires on the front gates. That's Dad's name, Jason stuttered. But that's impossible. Dad asks me for tech support on his flip phone. He doesn't own estates. He does now, Mrs. Whitmore spat. She turned on Brittany, her face red with indignation. You lied to us. You sat there at dinner last night while my husband paid the bill because your husband is incompetent, and you let us believe your father was a nobody. And now I find out he is the most powerful man in the zip code, and we treated him like the help. I didn't know, Brittany screamed, tears finally spilling over. I swear, Mom, I didn't know. He lives in a 2-bedroom apartment. He eats canned soup. Or maybe, Mrs. Whitmore said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. Maybe he just hates you. Maybe he hates you so much that he hid a fortune just to keep it away from you. And looking at you right now, standing there useless, while everyone else on this street gets a golden ticket. I can't say I blame him. Jason stood up. Mom, stop. We need to figure this out. If Conrad has this kind of money, maybe he can help. Maybe this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe our invitation got lost. Lost? Mrs. Whitmore laughed, a harsh barking sound. Gladys Parker got one. The mailman probably got one. You aren't invited, Jason. You were excluded. Explicitly. She walked to the window and looked out at the neighbors who were now gathering on their lawns, comparing invitations, laughing, pointing up toward the hill where the mansion stood. This is humiliating, Mrs. Whitmore whispered. I have friends coming to town next week. They will hear about this. They will hear that my son's father-in-law threw the party of the century, and we weren't even allowed past the gate. She turned back to them. Her eyes were cold stones. "Fix this," she ordered. "I don't care what you have to do. I don't care if you have to crawl on your knees. You get us into that party. You get us to the head table. Or you can forget about us ever bailing you out of this financial mess you've created. Do you understand?" Brittany looked at Jason. Jason looked at the floor. They both knew the truth. They hadn't just lost a Christmas dinner. They were about to lose their entire world. "We'll go there," Brittany said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. A desperate, manic light entered her eyes. "We'll just drive up there. He's my dad. He can't turn me away in front of the mayor. He loves me. He's just acting out. We'll go there and we'll make a scene if we have to. He hates scenes. He'll let us in just to shut us up." "Get dressed," Mrs. Whitmore commanded, "and wear something expensive. If I am going to war, I am not going to look like a pauper." Brittany ran up the stairs. She needed to find a dress. She needed to look like the daughter of a billionaire. She didn't realize yet that no dress could cover the stain of what she had done. She didn't realize that the gates of the summit weren't just locked. They were welded shut against her. But she would find out. Soon. The party inside the summit was reaching a crescendo of calculated elegance. The air smelled of expensive perfume, aged mahogany, and the truffle-infused appetizers that were being circulated by servers in white tuxedos. I stood near the fireplace, a glass of 50-year-old scotch in my hand, listening to Senator Miller tell a story about his days in law enforcement. He was laughing, a deep, booming sound that signaled comfort and respect. I laughed with him, but my attention was divided. I knew that in the modern age, an event did not truly happen until it was documented online. I had hired a social media team discreetly positioned around the room to ensure that tonight's gala was not just a party, but a viral moment. At 8:45, the trigger was pulled. The mayor posted a selfie. It was a candid shot, perfectly lit by the crystal chandelier. In the frame, I was clinking glasses with him and the CEO of the largest tech firm in the state. I looked commanding in my bespoke Tom Ford suit, the fabric shimmering under the lights, a far cry from the polyester blends my daughter was used to seeing me wear. The caption was simple, yet devastating. "Honored to celebrate Christmas Eve with the legendary Conrad Blackwood at his breathtaking new estate, The Summit. A true pillar of our community returns to the spotlight." He tagged the location. He tagged me. Within minutes, the post was being shared, liked, and commented on by every social climber and gossip monger in the city. Down in the valley, inside the suffocating gloom of Brittany's living room, the notification sound of a cell phone broke the tense silence. I can reconstruct the scene perfectly because I know them. I know their habits. I know their addictions. Brittany would have been sitting on her beige sofa, doom-scrolling, desperately looking for a distraction from the disaster of her evening. The Whitmores would be pacing nursing glasses of cheap wine, their earlier fury settling into a cold, simmering resentment. Jason would be staring at the floor, terrified of the inevitable audit his boss had threatened. Brittany's thumb would have hovered over the screen. She would have seen the mayor's post. She would have stopped breathing for a second. "Mom," Brittany whispered, her voice trembling. "You need to see this." Mrs. Whitmore, draped in her silk robe like a deposed queen, snatched the phone from Brittany's hand. She stared at the small screen. The blue light illuminated the deepening lines of fury on her face. She swiped left. There were more photos. There was a photo of me showing the senator the wine cellar. A photo of the 20-foot Christmas tree adorned with Swarovski crystals. A video clip of the live jazz band playing on the marble terrace. And in every frame there was the undeniable, overwhelming evidence of extreme wealth. "This is not a rental," Mrs. Whitmore hissed. Her voice started low, a rumble of disbelief. "Look at the art on the walls. That is a Basquiat. I saw it at auction last year. It sold for $4 million. Jason leaned in, squinting at the screen. "That is my boss," he choked out. "That is Mr. Sterling. He is laughing. He is drinking wine with Conrad. He never drinks with employees. He fires employees. Mrs. Whitmore threw the phone onto the sofa cushion. It bounced harmlessly, but the violence of the gesture made everyone flinch. She began to pace her silk robe billowing around her like the cape of a villain. "He lied to us," she screamed. The sound tore through the quiet suburban house. "He played us for fools. He sat there in that diner last month letting me pay for his coffee while he was sitting on millions. Millions." Brittany was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't understand. Why? Why would he do this? Why would he hide it from me? I am his daughter. I am his only child. That money, that house, it should be ours. It's my inheritance. He is mocking us." Mrs. Whitmore declared, stopping in the center of the room. She looked at her husband, who was pale and silent. "Harold, do you see what is happening? This isn't just about him being rich. This is about him making us look poor. He invited the whole town. He invited Gladys Parker. He invited the mayor. And he left us here to rot in this middle-class mediocrity." She looked around Brittany's living room with renewed disgust. The furniture she had once complimented now looked cheap to her. The decorations looked tacky. Compared to what she saw on that screen, this house was a hovel, and she was trapped in it. "It is a misunderstanding," Jason said, his voice rising in a desperate attempt to rationalize the nightmare. "It has to be. Maybe he kept it secret for security reasons. Maybe he was testing us, and we failed the test." "Oh God, we failed the test. We did not fail anything," Mrs. Whitmore snapped. She walked over to Jason and grabbed him by the shoulders. "Listen to me. You are a smart boy, Jason. Think. A man like that, a man who plays games like this, he is unstable. He is erratic. Who buys a mansion overnight? Who hides a fortune from his own flesh and blood? A crazy person. That is who." A dangerous glint entered her eyes. She wasn't just angry anymore. She was calculating. Greed had overridden her shame. She saw an angle. "He is senile," Mrs. Whitmore said firmly. "Just like you said, Jason. He has lost his mind. He is spending your inheritance on parties and strangers because he isn't thinking straight. This proves it. This extravagance proves he needs a guardian." Brittany looked up, hope warring with confusion in her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I am saying we have rights," Mrs. Whitmore said. She smoothed her hair, her posture straightening. "We are his family. We are the ones who have been caring for him, worrying about him. If he is squandering the family estate during a manic episode, it is our duty to step in. We have to go there." "Go there?" Brittany asked. "But the security guard, the list." "To hell with the list," Mrs. Whitmore roared. She grabbed her purse. "He is your father. Do you think he is going to let security drag his daughter away in front of the senator, in front of the mayor? No. He cares about his image. That is why he threw this party. He wants to be the big man. If we show up looking devastated, looking concerned, and we demand to speak to him, he will fold. He will have to let us in to avoid a scene." She turned to her husband. "Harold, get the car keys. We are going to the summit." Jason stood up, wringing his hands. "Mom, I don't know. Mr. Sterling is there. If I show up and cause a scene—" "You are already fired, Jason," Mrs. Whitmore shouted. "You have nothing left to lose. But if we get in there, if we get Conrad alone, we can fix this. We can tell him we were just trying to protect him. We can tell him we were hurt, that he didn't trust us. We can spin this. But we have to be in the room. We cannot win if we are sitting here watching it on Instagram." The logic of the desperate took hold of them. They convinced themselves that I was a confused old man who had been led astray by bad advisors. They convinced themselves that my rejection was a cry for help. They convinced themselves that the $25 million mansion was actually theirs by right of blood and marriage. They moved with a frantic energy now. Brittany ran to the mirror, wiping away her smeared mascara and reapplying lipstick with a trembling hand. She tried to fix her hair, pulling it into a severe bun to look more serious, more responsible. She changed her shoes, swapping her comfortable slippers for sky-high heels that she thought screamed power, but only screamed try hard. Mrs. Whitmore put on her fur coat. It was a vintage piece, slightly moth-eaten at the collar, but in the dark she hoped it would pass for opulence. She put on every piece of jewelry she had traveled with, layering gold chains over pearls in a gaudy display of armor. "We are going to demand an explanation," Mrs. Whitmore rehearsed, talking to herself in the hallway mirror. "We are going to tell him that we are hurt. We are going to tell him that family comes first. And if he tries to kick us out, we will scream. We will scream so loud that the mayor himself will come over to see what is wrong. And then we will tell everyone that Conrad Blackwood abandoned his pregnant daughter." Brittany wasn't pregnant, but in the heat of their delusion, facts had become malleable. They piled into Jason's BMW. The engine whined as he started it. The fuel gauge was hovering on empty, the warning light glowing an angry orange on the dashboard. "We have enough to get up the hill," Jason muttered, tapping the gauge. "We just have to get there. Once we are inside, he will have to give us money. He won't let us run out of gas on his driveway." They backed out of the driveway, tires screeching. As they drove through the neighborhood, they saw the dark houses of their neighbors. Mrs. Parker's house was dark because she was at the party. The Gables' house was dark because they were at the party. It felt like the rapture had happened, and they were the only sinners left behind. This isolation didn't make them reflect on their behavior. It only fueled their rage. They felt victimized. They felt cheated. Mrs. Whitmore sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through the photos on her phone, feeding her anger with every swipe. "Look at that buffet," she muttered. "Lobster tails, caviar. He never bought us dinner, not once. He let us pay for pizza. It is sick. He is a sick, twisted man." "Dad isn't like this," Brittany said from the back seat, her voice small. "He was always so simple. Maybe someone stole his identity. Maybe that isn't even him." "Don't be stupid," Mrs. Whitmore snapped. "It is him. It is the man he really is, the man who thinks he is better than us, the man who laughs at us behind our backs. Well, we will see who is laughing when we crash his little coronation." They turned onto the main road leading out of the suburbs and toward the hills. The summit glowed in the distance, a beacon of golden light against the black sky. It looked impenetrable. It looked divine. To them, it looked like a bank vault that had been left open. They didn't see a home. They saw a solution to every mistake they had ever made. They saw the money that would pay the gambling debts, the mortgage, the car payments. They saw the status that would make their friends jealous again. "Drive faster," Mrs. Whitmore commanded. "Before he gives the toast, I want to walk in there right in the middle of his speech." Jason pressed the accelerator. The car surged forward, climbing the steep incline toward the estate. They were charging into battle with no weapons, no strategy, and no invitation, armed only with the magnificent, blinding arrogance of those who believe the world owes them a living. They didn't know that I was watching them. They didn't know that the GPS tracker I had installed on the BMW for insurance purposes was blinking on my tablet screen. I watched the little dot moving closer and closer to my gates. I took another sip of scotch. "Come on then," I whispered. "Come and get it." I signaled to Mike, my head of security. "They are 5 minutes out," I said. "Prepare the welcome committee. But do not stop them at the outer perimeter. Let them get to the main gate. I want them to see what they are missing before you turn them away." Mike nodded, his face grim. "Understood, sir." I walked back into the party. The warmth hit me, the smell of expensive cologne and joy. I adjusted my tie. I checked my reflection in the glass doors. I didn't look like a victim anymore. I looked like the executioner. The trap was set. The cheese was the lifestyle they so desperately craved. And the snap of the bar was going to be heard all the way to the county line. They were coming to demand justice, but they were about to receive judgment. And unlike the justice they imagined, mine would be swift, public, and absolutely final. I stood on the marble balcony of the second floor, my eyes fixed on the bank of high-definition security monitors that lined the wall of my private study. The party below was a hum of expensive laughter and clinking crystal. But up here, the only sound was the low electronic whir of the surveillance system. I held my glass of scotch, not to drink, but to steady my hand against the anticipation. I was like a general watching the enemy march into a valley I had already mined. The black BMW crested the hill. It looked pathetic against the backdrop of the estate. Its engine was whining, straining against the incline, and the fuel warning light must have been screaming. It did not wait in the line of limousines that were queuing politely for the valet. It swerved aggressively around a vintage Rolls-Royce, forcing the chauffeur to slam on his brakes. I saw the driver of the Rolls throw up a hand in disgust. It was Senator Miller's car. They had just cut off a United States senator. The audacity was breathtaking. The BMW screeched to a halt in front of the massive iron gates. The headlights cut through the winter mist, illuminating the heavy steel bars and the gold leaf crest of the summit. Mike, my head of security, stepped out of the guardhouse. He was a mountain of a man, an ex-Marine who wore his tuxedo with the threatening grace of a bouncer. He did not smile. He held a tablet in one hand and a flashlight in the other. I turned up the volume on the monitor. The audio feed from the gate was crystal clear. I saw the driver's door fly open. Jason stepped out. He looked disheveled. His tie was crooked, and sweat had made his hair plaster to his forehead, despite the freezing temperature. He marched up to Mike, trying to summon the arrogance of a man who wasn't terrified. "Open the gate," Jason barked. "We are family. We are here to see Conrad." Mike did not move. He did not check the list. He did not need to. I had given him a photo of Jason 3 hours ago with specific instructions. "Name," Mike asked, his voice flat and bored. "Jason Whitmore," Jason said, puffing out his chest. "And my wife, Brittany Blackwood, Conrad's daughter, and my parents. We are the guests of honor." There was a mix-up with the invitations. Mike looked down at the tablet. He scrolled slowly, deliberately, wasting their time. Then he looked up. The flashlight beam hit Jason directly in the eyes, making him squint and recoil. "I have a Jason Whitmore here," Mike said. Jason let out a sigh of relief. "See? I told you." "Now open the—" "You are on the blacklist," Mike interrupted, his voice booming in the cold night air. The silence that followed was absolute. Inside the car, I could see Brittany's face pressed against the glass, her mouth open in shock. "Excuse me," Jason stammered. "The blacklist." "Correct," Mike said. "The blacklist is a specific designation for individuals who are permanently barred from entering the premises. It means you are not welcome. It means you are trespassing. Please reverse your vehicle and leave the property immediately. You are blocking the senator." Brittany exploded out of the passenger seat. She was wearing a silver dress that was too thin for the weather and heels that sank into the gravel. She stormed up to the gate, grabbing the iron bars like a prisoner rattling a cage. "This is insane," she shrieked. Her voice cracked with hysteria. "I am his daughter. You cannot blacklist his daughter. He owns this house. Go ask him. Go tell him Brittany is here. He will fire you for this. Do you hear me? He will fire you on the spot." Mike looked at her with zero sympathy. "Mr. Blackwood is aware of the guest list, ma'am. He wrote it. And he was very specific. No exceptions. Especially not for you." Mrs. Whitmore rolled down the back window. Her fur coat was pulled tight around her throat. "Officer," she called out, trying to use her country club voice. "There has clearly been a misunderstanding. We are here to help Conrad. He is unwell. We are his caregivers. If you don't let us in, he could be in danger. We have medical concerns." Mike actually laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Ma'am, Mr. Blackwood is currently toasting with the mayor inside. He looks very healthy to me. Now move the car." It was at that moment that the humiliation went from private to public. The Rolls-Royce behind them honked politely. Jason ignored it, too paralyzed by the rejection. Then another car pulled up behind the Rolls. It was a sleek black Mercedes sedan. The window rolled down. I leaned closer to the monitor. I recognized the profile immediately. It was Mr. Henderson, the president of First City Bank. The man who held the mortgage on Brittany's house. The man whose bank had just frozen their credit cards hours ago. Mr. Henderson stuck his head out. "Is there a problem up there?" he called out. "We are missing the appetizers." Jason turned around. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He recognized the voice. He recognized the car. He tried to hide behind the pillar of the gate, but there was nowhere to go. Henderson squinted into the lights. "Jason," he asked, his voice full of surprise and then sudden cold recognition. "Jason Whitmore, is that you?" Jason stepped forward, his shoulders slumped. "Hello, Mr. Henderson." "What is the holdup?" Henderson asked. Mike stepped forward, addressing the banker over Jason's shoulder. "I apologize, Mr. Henderson. These individuals are on the security blacklist and are refusing to vacate the entrance. We are about to call the police to have them removed." "The blacklist," Henderson repeated. He looked at Jason with a mixture of pity and professional disgust. The kind of look a banker gives a client who has just bounced a check. "Jason, I thought you said you were close with Mr. Blackwood." Henderson said, "When you applied for that loan extension last week, you said he was practically a silent partner in your household." "He is," Jason squeaked. "He is. This is just a joke." He has a weird sense of humor. "It does not look like a joke," Henderson said, icing over. "It looks like you are trespassing. And considering the status of your accounts as of 5 p.m. today, I would suggest you stop making scenes and start looking for a bankruptcy attorney. Now move your car. You are embarrassing yourself." Jason looked like he might vomit. He stumbled back toward the BMW. But Brittany wasn't done. The shame didn't stop her, it fueled her. She was vibrating with rage. She felt the eyes of the senator in the Rolls and the banker in the Mercedes boring into her back. She felt the judgment, and she snapped. She grabbed a handful of gravel and threw it at the gate. It clattered harmlessly against the steel. "Conrad," she screamed at the top of her lungs. "I know you can hear me. You coward. Come out here and face me. You can't do this. You can't lock me out of my inheritance. This is my house too. I grew up with you. I put up with your poverty for years. You owe me this." Mike put a hand on his holster. He didn't draw his weapon, but the message was clear. "Ma'am, step back from the gate. Final warning." Mrs. Whitmore opened her door and stepped out into the mud. She grabbed Brittany's arm and yanked her back. Her face was a mask of fury, not at me, but at the spectacle Brittany was making. "Stop it," she hissed. "You look like a lunatic. Henderson is watching. Get in the car." "We aren't leaving," Brittany sobbed, fighting her mother-in-law's grip. "We can't leave. We have nowhere to go. The gas tank is empty. We can't get home. We are moving the car," Mrs. Whitmore commanded. "We are moving it out of sight. Get in." Jason practically fell into the driver's seat. He threw the car into reverse, nearly hitting the senator's bumper. He swerved onto the grass shoulder, dragging the undercarriage of his precious BMW over a hidden rock. There was a sickening crunch of metal on stone. Oil began to leak onto the pristine snow, but he didn't stop. He drove 50 yards down the fence line into the darkness, away from the lights and the judgment of the elite. I watched on the external perimeter cameras as the car died. The engine sputtered, coughed, and went silent. They were out of gas. They were stranded in the dark 100 yards from the party of the century in the freezing cold. I took a sip of my scotch. The burn was delightful. They were exactly where they deserved to be, on the outside looking in. But I knew them. I knew their greed was stronger than their pride. They wouldn't just sit there and freeze. They would try to find a way in. They believed they were entitled to the warmth inside. I switched the camera view to the side perimeter. The BMW sat dark and lifeless. The doors opened. 4 figures emerged. They were arguing. I could see Mrs. Whitmore pointing a finger at Jason, then at the house. I could see Brittany wiping her face and gesturing wildly at the fence. They walked toward the stone wall that surrounded the estate. It was 8 feet high, but in this section near the service entrance there was an old oak tree that grew close to the perimeter. I had instructed the landscapers not to trim it. I wanted to leave a temptation. I wanted to see if they would cross the final line. If they drove away, I might have left them with a shred of dignity. But if they climbed that wall, they became criminals. They became invaders. I watched as Jason cupped his hands. He boosted Brittany up. She scrambled onto the wall, her expensive dress snagging on the rough stone. She didn't care. She pulled herself up, panting, desperate. She straddled the wall, looking down into the estate gardens. She saw the lights of the ballroom through the trees. She saw the promised land. Then she helped Mrs. Whitmore. It was a struggle. The older woman had no athletic ability, but greed gave her strength. They hauled each other up, grunting and cursing, slipping on the icy stones. Jason and Mr. Whitmore followed. They dropped down onto the other side, landing in the soft mud of the flower beds. They were in. They looked at each other. They were covered in dirt. Brittany's dress was torn at the knee. Jason's suit was stained. Mrs. Whitmore had lost a shoe in the climb and was limping. They looked like refugees from a disaster, not guests at a gala. But they straightened their clothes. They patted their hair. They convinced themselves that once they walked into the light, once they stood before me, the sheer force of their presence would compel me to welcome them. They thought they could explain away the dirt. They thought they could charm the crowd. They began to walk toward the back of the house, toward the French doors that led to the ballroom. They moved through the shadows like rats scurrying toward a pantry. I turned away from the monitors. I had seen enough. The trap was sprung. The vermin were inside the walls. I walked out of the study and headed for the ballroom. The jazz band was playing a slow number. The guests were mingling, oblivious to the invasion force approaching from the garden. I signaled to the AV technician. "Get the presentation ready," I said. "They will be here in 2 minutes." He nodded and tapped his keyboard. The giant screen behind the stage went black, waiting for my signal. I walked to the center of the room. I took the microphone from the stand. The music faded. The guests turned to look at me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice warm and welcoming. "I hope you are enjoying the evening. Before we cut the cake, I have a special surprise, a family reunion of sorts." As if on cue, the handle of the French doors rattled. Then they burst open. A blast of freezing wind swept into the room, carrying with it 4 dirty, desperate figures. The crowd gasped. The silence that fell over the room was heavy and immediate. Brittany stood there, blinking in the bright light. She saw me standing on the stage, microphone in hand. She saw the hundreds of faces staring at her in shock. She didn't retreat. She advanced. She marched right into the center of the dance floor, trailing mud on the Italian marble. "Dad," she screamed, her voice raw and broken. Here we go, I thought. Showtime. The sudden intrusion of freezing wind was the first thing the guests noticed, as the French doors slammed against the interior walls with a violence that rattled the crystal in the chandeliers. The temperature in the ballroom dropped 10 degrees in a second, but the chill that swept through the crowd had nothing to do with the winter air. It was the social frost of absolute horror. I stood on the raised platform, the microphone loose in my hand, and watched them enter. It was a sight that defied the logic of the setting. This was a room of tuxedos and silk gowns, of champagne and caviar. And marching into the center of it, was a group of people who looked like they had just clawed their way out of a swamp. Brittany led the charge. My daughter. The girl who had demanded a peaceful Christmas away from my embarrassing poverty. She looked deranged. Her silver dress, once a symbol of her vanity, was now ripped up the side, exposing a bruised thigh. Mud caked her expensive heels and smeared her legs like war paint. Her hair had come loose from its severe bun, hanging in wet rat tails around a face distorted by a level of rage I had never seen in a human being. Behind her, Jason stumbled. He was a portrait of ruin. His suit jacket was torn at the shoulder, presumably from the oak tree, and there was a streak of black grease across his forehead. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the floor, praying for a sinkhole to open up and swallow him whole. He knew who was in this room. He knew his career was standing 10 feet away, holding a shrimp puff. The elder Whitmores brought up the rear. Mrs. Whitmore was limping heavily, her one remaining shoe making a lopsided clacking sound on the marble floor, clack thud, clack thud. Her fur coat was wet and smelled of damp animal. Mr. Whitmore looked like a man who was having a waking nightmare, his eyes wide and unblinking. They brought the smell of the wet earth and desperation into my sanctuary. They tracked black mud onto the pristine white Italian marble, leaving a trail of filth that marked their path from the garden to the dance floor. It was a physical manifestation of what they had done to my life for years. They were staining everything they touched. The silence in the room was total. The jazz band had stopped mid-note. The conversations died. 300 of the state's most influential people turned as one body to stare at the intruders. They didn't look scared. They looked offended. They looked at Brittany and her clan with the same expression one reserves for a cockroach scuttling across a wedding cake. Brittany didn't notice the disgust. In her mind, she was the heroine of this tragedy. She was the wronged princess storming the castle to reclaim her birthright. She mistook the silence for reverence. She thought they were waiting for her to speak. She marched right up to the edge of the stage. Her chest was heaving. Her eyes were locked on me. She didn't see her father. She saw a bank vault that had dared to lock her out. "You!" she hissed, pointing a shaking finger at me. Her voice was raw, scratching against the silence. "You fraud! You liar!" I looked down at her. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I stood with my hands clasped behind my back, looking every inch the master of the estate. The contrast between us was stark. I was clean, calm, and composed. She was dirty, hysterical, and unraveling. "Brittany," I said, my voice low and even, amplified slightly by the sound system. "You are interrupting." "Interrupting," she shrieked. Her voice cracked, scaling up to a register that made people wince. "I am interrupting. You are throwing a party in my house, in my inheritance, and you left me outside in the snow." She turned to the crowd, spreading her arms wide. The mud on her hands was visible to everyone. "Do you see him?" she screamed, addressing the mayor and the senator. "Do you see this man you are toasting? He is a fake. He is a monster. He abandoned his own family. He abandoned his grandson on Christmas Eve." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. The mention of a child always struck a nerve. Brittany heard it and latched onto it. She saw an opening. She played the mother card. "My son is hungry," she yelled, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. "My little Leo is sitting at home right now, cold and hungry, because this man, my own father, who decided to play games with our lives. He cut us off. He stole our money. He is hoarding millions while we starve." It was a magnificent lie. A performance worthy of an Oscar. If I hadn't known the truth. If I hadn't known that she had spent $50,000 on handbags last month while I paid her mortgage, I might have been impressed. She lunged for the stage. Security started to move forward, but I held up a hand to stop them. Let her speak, I thought. Let her dig the hole so deep she can never climb out. Brittany scrambled up the 3 steps to the platform. She grabbed the microphone stand. I stepped back, allowing her the space. She ripped the mic from the holder, clutching it with both hands like a lifeline. "Listen to me, everyone," she panted, her voice booming through the ballroom speakers, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You think Conrad Blackwood is a philanthropist. You think he is a good man. He is a liar. He lived in a dump for years pretending to be poor just to test us, just to trick us. Who does that? What kind of sick psychopath hides his wealth from his own daughter?" She pointed at Jason, who was trying to hide behind a potted palm tree. "My husband works himself to death," she lied effortlessly. "He works day and night to support us. And my father watches us struggle. He watches us drown in debt, and he laughs. He buys mansions and throws parties for strangers while his family suffers." Jason let out a small whimper as the gaze of the room shifted to him. He saw Mr. Sterling, his boss, standing near the bar. Sterling wasn't looking at Brittany. He was looking at Jason with eyes that were cold and dead. Jason tried to mouth the word sorry, but no sound came out. Brittany turned back to me. She was energized now, feeding off the adrenaline of the confrontation. And now she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that filled the room. "Now he thinks he can just replace us. He thinks he can buy new friends. But you all need to know who he really is. He is a man who hates his own blood. He is a man who would rather see his daughter beg than share a single crumb of his fortune." She looked at Mrs. Whitmore, who was nodding vigorously from the floor, urging her on. "We came here to help him." Brittany continued improvising wildly. "We found out he was having a mental breakdown, spending money recklessly. We came to save him from himself, and he locked the gates on us. He treated us like criminals. Look at us." She gestured to her torn dress and her muddy legs. "We had to climb the wall to check on him. We had to crawl through the mud to make sure he was safe. That is how much we love him, and this is how he repays us, by humiliating us." She stopped breathing hard, waiting for the applause, waiting for the crowd to rush the stage and carry her off on their shoulders. She waited for the senator to demand my arrest. She waited for the world to turn on Conrad Blackwood. But nobody moved. Nobody clapped. The silence stretched thin and tight. Then a single sound broke it. It was the sound of ice clinking in a glass as someone took a drink. Brittany looked around, confused. Why weren't they cheering? Why were they looking at her like she was a stain on the carpet? She didn't understand. She didn't understand that these people weren't just rich. They were perceptive. They could smell the entitlement on her. They could see the discrepancy between her story and her manicured nails, her expensive jewelry, and the sheer arrogance of her invasion. They didn't see a victim. They saw a predator who had been caught. I stepped forward. I moved slowly, deliberately, entering her personal space. I reached out and gently took the microphone from her hands. She was so stunned by the lack of reaction that she let it go without a fight. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I looked for the daughter I used to read bedtime stories to. I looked for the young woman I had walked down the aisle. I saw nothing. I saw a stranger. A stranger consumed by a hunger that could never be sated. "Thank you, Brittany," I said, my voice calm, soothing, almost fatherly. "Thank you for that passionate performance." I turned to the crowd. "My daughter raises some interesting points," I said, addressing the room. "She claims she is struggling. She claims I have abandoned her. She claims her husband is a martyr of industry." I paused, letting the words sink in. "She claims she had to climb a wall to check on my safety. It is a very moving story. It is the kind of story that breaks a father's heart." I looked back at Brittany. She was smiling smugly, thinking I was capitulating, thinking I was about to apologize and write her a check to save face. However, I continued, my voice hardening just a fraction, turning from father to judge. "There is a fundamental rule in business and in life. Trust, but verify." Brittany's smile faltered. "You see," I said, walking to the edge of the stage, My daughter forgot to mention a few details. She forgot to mention the definition of struggle in her household. She forgot to mention exactly where the money she claims she doesn't have actually went. I gestured to the back of the room where my AV technician was waiting. I believe in transparency, I said. So let us be transparent. Let us look at the receipts. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. Brittany looked around, panic starting to flare in her eyes again. "What are you doing?" she hissed at me. "Stop this. Just give me the money and we will leave." "It is too late for that," I whispered to her off mic. "You wanted an audience, Brittany. You wanted a scene. Now you have the main stage." The giant LED screen behind us, which had been displaying a tasteful loop of falling snow, suddenly went black. Then it flickered to life with a stark white background. Project Parasite appeared on the screen in bold black letters. Brittany froze. She recognized the term. She didn't know where it came from, but she knew it sounded bad. I walked to the side of the stage, giving the audience a clear view. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "my daughter claims I hid my wealth. That is true. But she claims I never helped her. That is a lie." I clicked a remote control I had pulled from my pocket. The screen changed. It displayed a series of bank transfers. They were magnified so even the people in the back could read the numbers. "These are the monthly transfers from the Angel Wing Trust," I explained. "A trust I established solely to pay the mortgage on the house Brittany lives in, $4,200 a month. Every month, for 5 years. A gasp went through the room. That was over $250,000. Brittany's mouth opened. That was a grant," she stammered. "We won a grant." I clicked the remote again. A document appeared on the screen. It was the incorporation papers of the Angel Wing Trust. Sole benefactor Conrad Blackwood. "There is no grant, Brittany," I said. "There is only me. I paid for the roof over your head so you could pretend to be independent." Jason let out a sound like a wounded animal. He saw his life crumbling in high definition. "But we aren't done," I said. I clicked the remote. A credit card statement appeared. It was redacted to show only the purchases and the totals. Neiman Marcus, $5,000. The spa at the Ritz, $2,000. Porsche leasing, $3,000. "This is from last month," I said. "While I was supposedly hoarding my millions and letting you starve, you were spending $10,000 a month on luxury goods, on credit cards that I guaranteed, on credit cards I paid off when you couldn't." The crowd was murmuring loudly now. The sympathy Brittany had hoped for had curdled into outrage. They were looking at her designer dress, her jewelry, her entitlement, and they were doing the math. "She isn't struggling," a woman in the front row whispered loud enough to be heard. "She is a leech." Brittany was shaking her head, backing away from the screen, as if the numbers were physical blows. "No," she whimpered. "No, that is private. You can't show that. You made it public when you broke into my house and grabbed the microphone," I said coldly. I clicked the remote again. "Now for the husband," I said. Jason tried to run. He actually turned and sprinted toward the French doors. But Mike was there. He simply stepped in front of the door, crossing his massive arms. Jason bounced off him and fell onto the muddy floor. The screen showed a series of wire transfers. International transfers. Online Casino Cayman Islands, $50,000. Sportsbet Antigua, $75,000. Jason's gambling debts, I announced. Debts that involved people who break legs for a living. Debts that I settled anonymously 2 weeks ago to keep my grandson's father alive. The room went deadly silent. Mr. Sterling, Jason's boss, walked slowly toward the stage. He looked up at the screen, reading the dates, reading the amounts. $200,000, Sterling said, his voice cutting through the room. That is the exact amount missing from the client escrow account Jason manages. Jason curled into a ball on the floor, was covering his head with his arms. I looked at Sterling. I didn't pay that one, I said. I only paid the bookies. If he stole from you, that is on him. Sterling turned to Jason. You are done, he said. I am calling the district attorney. Brittany was hyperventilating. She looked at her husband cowering in the mud. She looked at her parents who were trying to inch away into the shadows, pretending they didn't know her. She looked at me. Dad, she pleaded, her voice small and terrified. Stop. Please stop. We get it. We are sorry. Just turn it off. I am afraid there is one more thing, I said. The reason for tonight's visit. The reason you are here. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen went black. Then a waveform appeared. An audio file. This was recorded last night, I said. Outside your window. While I was dropping off a gift for my grandson. A grandson you told me I couldn't see. I pressed play. The sound of Jason's voice filled the ballroom, booming from the speakers. If we convince him to sell it and move into that state-subsidized nursing home on Elm Street, we could use the proceeds to invest in my company. We could tell him it is for his own safety. He is getting old and senile anyway. The crowd gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. Then Brittany's voice. I was afraid he would ask for money again. It is so draining to deal with his poverty mentality. And then Eleanor Whitmore's voice, the final nail in the coffin. May as well squeeze him dry before he kicks the bucket. The recording ended. I lowered the microphone. I didn't need to say anything else. The evidence hung in the air, toxic and undeniable. I looked at the Whitmores. Mrs. Whitmore was pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She felt the eyes of the senator on her. She felt the social death that was descending upon her. Brittany stood center stage, stripped of every lie, every pretense, every defense. She was naked in her greed. This I said, my voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room, is why you were not invited. Not because of my money, but because of your hearts. Brittany looked at the crowd. She saw the disgust. She saw the judgment. She realized that no amount of screaming, no amount of lying could fix this. She had climbed a wall to get into paradise, and she had found only hell. She looked at me one last time. Her eyes were dead. You ruined us, she whispered. No, Brittany, I replied. I just stopped paying for the illusion. I signaled to security. Get them out. The silence in the ballroom was a living thing, heavy and suffocating, a physical weight that pressed down on the shoulders of the 300 guests. Brittany stood center stage, her chest heaving, her face flushed with the triumph of her victimhood. She believed she had delivered the coup de grace. She believed that by screaming her pain she had turned the tide. She looked out at the sea of faces, expecting to see tears of sympathy, expecting the mayor to step forward and drape his coat over her shoulders. But the room was frozen. The air conditioning hummed a low, indifferent drone. I stood a few feet away, watching her. I adjusted the cuff of my tuxedo jacket. I felt a strange calm wash over me, the icy clarity of a surgeon about to make the first incision. I did not feel anger anymore. Anger is hot and messy. This was cold. This was accounting. Brittany, I said, my voice soft but amplified by the sound system cutting through the silence like a razor. You have told your story. You have painted a vivid picture of a neglected daughter and a struggling family. You have called me a monster. I paused, letting the word hang there. But in my business we have a saying. Data does not lie. People do. I turned my back on her. It was a dismissal, a subtle signal that she was no longer the protagonist of this scene. I gestured to the back of the room where my AV technician sat behind a bank of monitors. He was a young man named Kevin, whom I had paid triple his rate to be ready for this exact moment. He gave me a sharp nod. Lights, I said. The crystal chandeliers dimmed. The warm golden glow of the ballroom faded into a twilight gloom, leaving only the stage illuminated by harsh white spotlights. The atmosphere shifted instantly, from a celebration to an interrogation. Behind me, the massive LED screen, which had been displaying a harmless loop of winter scenery, flickered and went black. A low electronic hum filled the room. Then, with a digital crackle that made Mrs. Whitmore jump, the screen roared to life. It was 20 feet tall and 30 feet wide. The resolution was so high you could see the pixels in the document that appeared. Project Parasite. The words were typed in bold, stark font at the top of a spreadsheet. Brittany turned to look at the screen. Her mouth opened slightly. She blinked, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, addressing the crowd, my voice steady and authoritative. "My daughter claims she is struggling. She claims I have hoarded my wealth while she starved. She claims I abandoned my grandson to poverty. Let us examine the definition of poverty in the Whitmore household." I clicked the small remote concealed in my hand. The screen shifted. A bank statement appeared, blown up to monstrous proportions. It was dated 3 months prior. "Exhibit A," I said, walking slowly across the stage using the space like a courtroom. On September 12th, Brittany called me in tears. She told me that my grandson Leo had a severe asthma attack. She said their insurance had lapsed because of a clerical error. She needed $5,000 for an emergency room visit and a nebulizer. A ripple of sympathy went through the crowd. A sick child was a universal trigger. "I sent the money immediately," I continued. "Cash transfer. No questions asked. Because that is what a father does." I clicked the remote. The bank statement vanished, replaced by a credit card receipt. It was time-stamped September 13th, the day after the transfer. But Leo did not go to the hospital. I said, my voice dropping an octave. The receipt on the screen was from the Chanel boutique on Fifth Avenue. The total was $4,850. Item description: classic flap bag, lambskin black. The gasps from the audience were audible. Mrs. Parker, the neighbor, covered her mouth with her hand. Brittany froze. She looked at the screen, then at her purse, which was currently resting on a chair near the entrance. It was that bag. I zoomed in on the date. While I was pacing my apartment, worrying about my grandson's ability to breathe, I said, my voice hardening, my daughter was buying a handbag. She used the money for his medicine to accessorize. Liar Brittany shrieked, trying to lunge for the screen as if she could physically tear the image down. "That is fake. You forged that." I didn't even look at her. I clicked the remote again. "Exhibit B," I announced. A new document appeared. It was an invoice from a mechanic. October 4th, Jason called me. He was frantic. He said the transmission on their only family car had failed. He said he couldn't get to work. He said he was at risk of losing his job if he couldn't commute. He asked for $3,000. I looked at Jason. He was still on the floor, so near the door, held in check by Mike's imposing presence. He was shaking his head, pleading silently with his eyes. "I sent the check," I said. "I drove it over myself." I put it in his hand. Click. A new image appeared. It wasn't a receipt this time. It was a photograph. It was taken from a social media account that had been set to private, but nothing is private when you hire the best forensic investigators in the state. The photo showed Jason and Brittany sitting in VIP seats at a professional football game. They were holding beers. They were laughing. The date stamp was October 5th. Ticket price per seat, $1,500, I read from the screen. Total cost, $3,000. I turned to the crowd. "The car was never broken," I said. "They drove it to the stadium. I paid for their date night while I ate canned soup for a week to make up the deficit in my budget." The room was turning. The room was... I could feel it. The shock was being replaced by a cold, hard anger. These people, the senator, the banker, the mayor, they understood money. They respected money. but they despised waste and they loathed fraud. Mrs. Whitmore let out a low moan. She was clutching her pearls, her eyes darting around the room looking for an exit, but there was no way out that didn't involve walking through a gauntlet of judgment. "But we are just getting started," I said. I walked to the center of the stage. My daughter claims her husband is a martyr, a man who works himself to the bone. Let us look at Jason's work ethic. I clicked the remote. The screen turned red. A complex web of wire transfers appeared. "Jason Whitmore creates marketing campaigns for Sterling Industries," I said, gesturing to Mr. Sterling, who was standing in the front row, his face a mask of stone. Or at least he is supposed to. I pointed to a highlighted column. "Over the last 6 months, Jason has diverted client funds into a personal offshore account in the Cayman Islands. He labeled them consulting fees." Sterling stepped forward, his eyes glued to the screen. He was reading the account numbers. He recognized them. $50,000 in July, I read. $75,000 in August. $100,000 in September. Jason screamed. It was a high, thin sound, like a rabbit caught in a trap. "No," he yelled. "No, that is not true. Those were loans. I was going to pay them back." I clicked the remote again. "And where did the money go?" I asked. "Did it go to charity? Did it go to his starving family?" The screen displayed a log from an online gambling site. Ace High Poker. It went to the tables, I said. $225,000 lost in 4 months. The crowd recoiled. This was not just family drama anymore. This was a felony. I turned to Mr. Sterling. "I found this 2 weeks ago," I said to him. "I covered it. I transferred the money from my private holdings to replenish the escrow account before the audit. I did it to save my daughter from the shame of having a husband in prison." Sterling looked at me, then at Jason. "You paid it?" he asked, his voice rough. "I did," I said, "but I am done paying." Sterling turned to Jason. His face was purple with rage. "You stole from me," he roared. "You stole from my clients, and you stood here drinking my wine." Jason collapsed. He didn't just fall, he disintegrated. He curled into a fetal ball on the marble floor, sobbing into the mud he had tracked in. Brittany was shaking her head back and forth, a metronome of denial. "Dad, stop," she whispered. "You are ruining us. Everyone is watching." "I want them to watch," I said, my voice rising, thundering through the hall. "I want them to see exactly what you are. You aren't victims, Brittany. You are predators. You feed on the goodwill of others. You consume everything, and you produce nothing but lies." I clicked the remote one last time. The screen went black. The room was plunged into a heavy, anticipatory darkness. "There is one final piece of evidence," I said. A waveform appeared on the screen, a simple green line representing an audio file. "Last night," I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper that forced everyone to lean in, "I went to your house. I brought a Lego set for Leo. I stood on your porch, and I heard you." Brittany's eyes went wide. She remembered. She remembered the conversation. She remembered the laughter. "No," she mouthed. "Please." I pressed play. The audio was crystal clear, enhanced by digital processing. Jason's voice boomed through the ballroom, confident and cruel. "If we convince him to sell it and move into that state-subsidized nursing home on Elm Street, we could use the proceeds to invest in my company." A gasp rippled through the room. The mention of a nursing home, the calculated cruelty of it, struck a chord of horror. "He's getting old and senile anyway," Jason's voice continued. "He won't even know the difference." Then Brittany's voice filled the room, sharp and impatient. "I was afraid he would ask for money again. It is so draining to deal with his poverty mentality. I just want him out of the way so we can enjoy Christmas without looking at his cheap clothes." I watched the faces of the guests. I saw Mrs. Parker turn away in disgust. I saw the mayor shake his head slowly. I saw the total evaporation of any remaining social capital Brittany had ever possessed. But the recording wasn't done. Mrs. Whitmore's voice cut through the air, shrill and greedy. "Well, he can't live forever. May as well squeeze the lemon dry before he kicks the bucket. We deserve that money for putting up with him." The recording ended. The green line went flat. The silence that followed was violent. It was the silence of a courtroom after a death sentence has been read. Mrs. Whitmore stood frozen near the door. Her fur coat suddenly looked like a molting animal skin. She felt the eyes of 300 people dissecting her, stripping away her pretensions, leaving her naked in her malice. She tried to speak, to offer a defense, but no sound came out. Brittany stood alone in the center of the floor. She looked at the screen, then at me. She realized that there was no spin for this. There was no lie that could cover the naked ugliness of her own voice plotting against her father. She looked at Jason, who was still sobbing on the floor. She looked at her parents, who were inching away from her, trying to dissociate themselves from the disaster. She was completely alone. I walked down the stairs. The crowd parted for me, creating a wide path to where my daughter stood. I stopped 3 feet from her. I could smell the sweat of her fear. "You wanted space, Brittany," I said, my voice calm but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "You wanted a peaceful Christmas without me." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup, making her look like a tragic clown. "Dad," she whispered. "I didn't mean it. We were just talking." It was the wine. I shook my head. "In vino veritas," I said. "In wine there is truth. And the truth is, you don't love me. You love what you thought you could take from me." I gestured to the screen where the evidence of their betrayal still glowed. "You plotted to put me away," I said. "You plotted to erase me so you could spend my life's work on handbags and gambling. You looked at your father and you saw a piggy bank to be smashed." I turned to the security team. "Mike," I said. Mike stepped forward, his shadow falling over Brittany. "I want them removed," I said, immediately. And Mike, "Yes, sir. Call the police. Mr. Sterling would like to file charges for embezzlement, and I would like to file charges for elder abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud." Brittany let out a wail that sounded inhuman. "No, Dad, please. Not the police. Leo. Think of Leo." I leaned in close to her so only she could hear me. "I am thinking of Leo," I whispered. "That is why I am doing this. I am cutting out the rot so he has a chance to grow." I straightened up and looked at the crowd. "I apologize for this unpleasantness," I said loud and clear, "but I believe that Christmas is a time for truth, and tonight the truth has been served." 2 security guards grabbed Jason, hauling him to his feet. He hung limp between them, a broken man. 2 more approached the Whitmores, who began to shriek about their rights, about lawsuits, about knowing powerful people. "Get your hands off me," Mrs. Whitmore screamed, kicking her one-shoed foot. "Do you know who we are?" "Everyone knows who you are now," Mike said, grabbing her arm. "You are the people who tried to rob an old man. Move." Brittany looked at me one last time as Mike took her elbow. Her eyes were full of a terrible, dawning realization. She saw the man in the tuxedo. She saw the power. She saw the father she had thrown away. "Dad," she sobbed. "Dad, I am sorry." "It is too late for sorry," I said. They were dragged toward the doors. The guests watched them go, a sea of cold faces. As the doors opened, the wind howled outside, waiting to swallow them up. They were thrown out into the snow, into the cold, into the poverty they had so feared and which they had now earned for themselves. The doors slammed shut with a finality that echoed in the bones of everyone present. I stood there for a moment, looking at the closed doors. I felt a deep ache in my chest, the phantom pain of a limb that has been amputated to save the body. It hurt. God, it hurt. but the infection was gone. I turned back to the room. "Play something upbeat," I said to the band. The music started. The conversation resumed, hesitant at first, then louder, fueled by the adrenaline of the spectacle. Mr. Sterling walked up to me. He put a hand on my shoulder. "That was the hardest thing I have ever seen a man do," he said quietly. "It had to be done," I replied. He nodded. "You saved your company, Conrad, and you saved that boy. If Jason had stayed, he would have destroyed everything." "I know," I said. I walked to the bar and poured myself another drink. My hand was steady. I looked up at the giant screen. The evidence was still there, glowing. "Clear it," I said to the technician. "Put the snow back on." The screen flickered and returned to the gentle loop of falling snow. The numbers vanished. The receipts vanished. But the truth remained. It was etched into the minds of everyone in that room. I took a sip of my drink. I had won. I had protected my legacy. I had avenged my dignity. But as I looked out at the party, at the laughing guests, at the opulence I had bought, to prove a point, I realized that the victory was cold. It was as cold as the snow falling outside. And yet, it was better than the warmth of a lie. I walked toward the window and looked out into the night. Somewhere down there in the dark, my family was breaking apart. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. The screen behind me had gone dark, but the afterimage of the evidence burned in the retinas of everyone in the room. The silence that followed was not the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a funeral. It was the sound of lives ending not biologically, but socially and professionally. Jason remained on the floor, a crumpled heap of ruined potential in a muddy suit. He looked up, his eyes darting frantically, searching for an exit, for a friendly face, for anything that wasn't the cold, hard stare of the man whose money he had stolen. Mr. Sterling moved first. He did not run. He walked with the heavy, deliberate gait of a man who had just realized he had been harboring a parasite. He stopped 2 feet from where Jason lay. He looked down at him not with anger, but with the clinical detachment of a sanitation worker looking at a spill. "Get up," Sterling said, his voice low and flat. Jason scrambled to his knees, his hands clasping together in a prayer of desperation. "Mr. Sterling, please let me explain. It was a loan. I intended to pay it back. I have a system. I just needed time." "You don't have time," Sterling replied. "You don't have a job. As of this moment, your employment is terminated for cause." "But the accounts," Jason stammered, reaching out to grab the hem of Sterling's trousers. "I can fix the accounts. My father-in-law, he paid it back. The money is there." Sterling took a step back, revulsion flickering across his face. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his hands as if the mere proximity to Jason had soiled him. "The fact that Conrad covered your theft does not mean you didn't steal Jason Sterling," said his voice projecting clearly to the silent room. "It just means I don't have a hole in my balance sheet. But I do have a criminal in my organization. Or I did." Sterling turned to the crowd, addressing the room as if making a boardroom announcement. "I want to be clear," he stated. "Sterling Industries has zero tolerance for embezzlement. My legal team is already drafting the complaint. We will be seeking full restitution for any additional funds discovered during the forensic audit, which starts tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And Jason looked up, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the dirt. "I will be pressing criminal charges," Sterling said. "Grand larceny, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. You won't just be unemployed, you will be unemployable. You will never work in finance again. You will be lucky if you get a job sweeping floors when you get out of prison." Jason let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He collapsed forward, his forehead hitting the marble floor with a dull thud. He stayed there, shaking, curled into a ball of absolute defeat. Brittany watched her husband fall apart. She didn't move to comfort him. She didn't kneel beside him. She looked at him with a dawn of horror, realizing that the man she had married, the man she had pressured to provide her with a luxury lifestyle, was now an anchor dragging her down to the bottom of the ocean. She turned to her parents-in-law, the Whitmores. She looked for allies. She looked for the people who had encouraged her to demand entry to this party. Mrs. Whitmore was standing by the buffet table, clutching her husband's arm. Her face was a mask of pale fury. When Brittany's eyes met hers, the older woman's expression did not soften. It hardened into something brittle and sharp. "You," Mrs. Whitmore hissed, pointing a shaking finger at Brittany. "This is your fault." Brittany recoiled. "My fault? You told us to come here. You told us to climb the wall. I told you to fix it." Mrs. Whitmore shrieked, her voice cracking. "I didn't tell you to marry a thief. I didn't know you were living on charity. You lied to us. You told us Jason was a partner. You told us you were successful." She stepped forward, her one-shoed foot limping on the stone. She looked at Brittany with pure, unadulterated loathing. "We thought you came from good stock," she spat. "We thought you brought value to this family. But you are just trash. You are a fraud, just like your husband." "Mom, please," Jason moaned from the floor. "Help me. I need a lawyer." Mrs. Whitmore looked down at her son. There was no maternal instinct left in her eyes, only the survival instinct of a social climber who sees her status evaporating. A lawyer, she laughed, a harsh barking sound. "You need a miracle. Do not look at us. Do not ask us for a penny. You have humiliated us in front of the senator, in front of the mayor. You have dragged the Whitmore name through the mud, quite literally." She turned to her husband. "Harold, tell him. Tell him we are done." Mr. Whitmore, who had been silent all evening, looked at his son. His face was gray. He looked old and tired. "You are on your own, Jason," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We cannot be associated with this. We have a reputation." They turned their backs. They physically turned their backs on their son and daughter-in-law, creating a wall of fur and tweed between them and the disaster. It was a brutal disowning, swift and total. Brittany stood alone in the center of the room. Her husband was broken. Her in-laws had rejected her. Her father was the executioner. The room was spinning. She looked around wildly, looking for an escape, looking for a way to rewind the tape to undo the last hour. Then the blue and red lights washed over the ballroom walls. They flashed through the tall windows, painting the guests in strobes of police emergency colors. The sound of sirens cut through the winter air, growing louder and louder, until they stopped right outside the front entrance. The heavy oak doors opened again, but this time it wasn't intruders. It was the law. 4 police officers walked in. They were not smiling. They were not here for the buffet. They shook the snow off their shoulders and scanned the room. Mike, my head of security, stepped forward to meet the sergeant. He pointed at the group in the center of the floor. "That is them," Mike said. "Trespassing, destruction of private property, harassment. And Mr. Sterling over there would like to make a statement regarding a felony embezzlement." The sergeant nodded. He signaled to his team. They moved in with efficient professional speed. 2 officers hauled Jason to his feet. He was dead weight. He didn't resist. He just hung there, limp and weeping, as they pulled his arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and final. Click. Click. Jason Whitmore. "You are under arrest," the officer recited the Miranda rights, but Jason wasn't listening. He was staring at the floor, his life flashing before his eyes in a sequence of bad bets and stolen money. 2 other officers approached Brittany. She backed away, her hands raised. "No," she whispered. "No, you can't arrest me. I am his daughter. I live here." "You do not live here, ma'am," the officer said, pulling her arms down. "You broke into the property. The owner has pressed charges. They spun her around. She screamed as the cold metal touched her wrists. Dad! She wailed, turning her head to look at me. Dad, stop them. Please. I am your little girl. You can't let them take me to jail. Not on Christmas. I stood on the steps looking down at her. I felt a phantom ache in my heart, the memory of the love I used to have for her. But I forced myself to remember the recording. I forced myself to remember her voice plotting to put me away. You made your choice, Brittany, I said, my voice carrying over her screams. You chose the money. Now you have to pay the bill. The officers began to march them out. The Whitmores tried to blend into the crowd, tried to look like innocent bystanders, but the sergeant pointed at them too. You too as well, he said. You were identified as part of the group that breached the perimeter fence. Mrs. Whitmore let out a shriek of indignation as an officer grabbed her elbow. Do not touch me. I am a victim here. I was kidnapped. They forced me to come. Tell it to the judge, the officer said, pushing her forward. The procession of ruin moved toward the doors. The guests parted like the Red Sea, making sure not to touch them, not to be tainted by their downfall. The phone cameras held by guests flashed, capturing the walk of shame, documenting the end of the Whitmore pretensions. As they reached the doors, Brittany dug her heels in one last time. She looked back at the warm, glowing room, at the life she had wanted so desperately, at the father she had underestimated. I hate you, she screamed, her face twisted and ugly. I hate you. I hope you die alone in this big house. The doors slammed shut, cutting off her voice. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was clean. It was the silence of a storm that has passed, leaving the air scrubbed and raw. I looked at the closed doors. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and wood smoke. I felt lighter. The weight of their lies, the weight of their parasitism was gone. I turned back to the room. Mr. Sterling was adjusting his tie, looking shaken, but resolute. The mayor was nodding slowly, as if approving of the justice that had been served. I raised my glass. To consequences, I said softly. I drank. The scotch tasted like closure, but the night wasn't over. There was one more piece of business to attend to. One innocent life that needed to be salvaged from the wreckage. I looked at Sarah, my lawyer. She was already on her phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. She caught my eye and nodded. It was time to get Leo. The sirens faded into the distance, carrying away the noise and the fury of my daughter and her husband, leaving behind a silence that felt sacred. The guests in the ballroom remained still, holding their breath, waiting for the final act of the evening. They had witnessed the execution of a reputation, but they knew there was still a loose end. A 7-year-old loose end named Leo. I turned to Sarah O'Connor, my attorney, who was standing near the orchestra pit. She was typing furiously on her tablet, her face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. She looked up and met my gaze. She nodded once. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. I motioned for the music to remain off. I walked back to the center of the room. I needed to address this. I needed to make sure that everyone here understood that this was not just about punishment. It was about protection. I know what you are thinking, I said to the room, my voice echoing slightly. You are thinking that I am a hard man. You are thinking that I just orphaned my grandson on Christmas Eve. I paused, looking at the faces of the parents in the crowd. I saw doubt. I saw worry. But you are wrong, I continued. I did not orphan him. I liberated him. Sarah stepped forward. She held a thick manila envelope in her hand. She handed it to me. I opened it and pulled out a document stamped with the seal of the family court. This is an emergency temporary custody order, I announced, holding the paper up. It was signed by Judge Henderson 20 minutes ago based on the evidence we presented regarding the immediate danger to the child's welfare. I looked at Mr. Sterling. You saw the financial records, I said. You saw the gambling. You saw the fraud. But what you did not see was the neglect. I turned to the screen behind me. I signaled Kevin. "Show them the last slide," I said. The screen flickered to life one last time. It was a report from a private investigator. It detailed the hours Brittany and Jason spent out of the house. It showed logs of Leo being left alone for hours at a time while his parents were at casinos or shopping malls. It showed a refrigerator in their house that was empty except for wine and takeout containers. "My daughter and her husband are not just thieves," I said, my voice trembling with a suppressed rage that I had held back all night. "They are unfit. They are fundamentally incapable of caring for another human being because they are consumed by their own appetites." I looked at the document in my hand. While Brittany was screaming at my gate, I said quietly my private security team was executing a welfare check at her home. They found Leo alone. On Christmas Eve. The heat had been turned down to save money. He was eating cereal from a box in the dark. A gasp of horror swept through the room. This was the final straw. The socialite mask Brittany had worn was completely shattered, revealing the monster underneath. "He is not there anymore," I said. "He is currently in the care of a pediatric nanny service I retained. He is warm. He is fed. And he is surrounded by the Lego sets I bought him." Sarah stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was sharp, professional, and terrifyingly competent. "As Mr. Blackwood's legal counsel, I have already filed a motion for permanent termination of parental rights," she stated. "The evidence is overwhelming. We have financial instability due to criminal activity. We have moral turpitude demonstrated by the conspiracy to harm a senior citizen. And we have documented neglect." She looked around the room, engaging the eyes of the most powerful people in the city. "There is no judge in this state who will return a child to a couple facing federal indictment for fraud and elder abuse," she said. "Jason Whitmore will be in prison for a decade. Brittany Blackwood will be facing charges of conspiracy. They have no home. They have no income. They have no future." I stepped back in taking the microphone. "But Leo has a future," I said. I pulled another document from the envelope. It was bound in blue leather. "This is the Blackwood Generational Trust," I announced. "I established it this morning. It is irrevocable. It is funded with $10 million of my personal capital." I opened the booklet. "This money is for Leo," I said. "It pays for his education. It pays for his health care. It pays for his travel. It ensures that he will never know the desperation that drove his parents to madness." I looked at the crowd, my eyes hard. "But there is a condition," I said. "A strict condition. Not 1 cent of this money can ever be accessed by his parents. Not for legal fees. Not for bail. Not for rent. If they ever attempt to contact him to solicit funds, the trust dissolves and the assets are donated to charity." I closed the booklet with a snap. "I am cutting off the infection," I said. "I am ensuring that the cycle of greed ends with this generation. Leo will not grow up thinking he is entitled to money he didn't earn. He will grow up knowing that wealth is a tool for good, not a weapon for manipulation." I looked out the window at the falling snow. I thought of my grandson, sitting in a warm room somewhere safe from the chaos I had unleashed. I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the scotch. "I am 71 years old," I said softly. "I do not have many years left. I should be resting. I should be playing golf." I turned back to the room. "Instead, I am going to raise a boy," I said. "I am going to teach him how to be a man. I am going to teach him the value of $1 and the value of a word. I am going to do for him what I failed to do for his mother." I looked at Mr. Sterling. "You fired Jason tonight," I said. "You did the right thing. But I am asking you a favor." Sterling nodded. "Anything, Conrad." "When Leo is old enough," I said, "give him a job. An entry-level job. Make him sweep the floors." Make him earn his place. Do not let him coast because of his name." Sterling smiled a genuine expression of respect. "You have my word." I raised my glass one last time. "To Leo," I said, "the future of the Blackwood name." The room erupted in a toast. "To Leo," they echoed. I handed the microphone to Sarah. I was done with speeches. I was done with drama. I had destroyed my family to save it. It was a paradox that only a man who had walked through fire could understand. I walked away from the stage. The guests parted from me, touching my arm, offering words of support. They didn't see a cruel old man anymore. They saw a patriarch protecting his bloodline. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the 3rd floor. The doors slid shut, cutting off the noise of the party. I leaned my head against the cool metal wall. I was exhausted. My bones ached. My heart ached. But as the elevator rose, carrying me up to the private wing where I had set up a temporary nursery for Leo, I smiled. Brittany had wanted space. She had wanted privacy. She had wanted a life without me. Now she had it. She had a cold cell and a court date. And I had the one thing she had never truly valued. I had her son. And I was going to make sure he became the man she could never be. The last limousine taillights faded into the darkness, leaving red streaks against the white snow. The party was over. The guests had departed, carrying with them the story of the century. They would talk about the food. They would talk about the wine. But mostly, they would talk about the moment Conrad Blackwood returned from the dead to bury his own family. I stood in the center of the empty ballroom. The staff was already moving silently, clearing away the glasses, sweeping the floor where the mud had been. They worked with the efficiency of a pit crew. By morning, there would be no trace that the Whitmores had ever violated this space. It would be pristine again. A blank slate. Just like my life. James the butler approached me with a silver tray. He held out a fresh glass of scotch. It was the 30-year-old single malt. "Will there be anything else?" Sir James asked, his voice low and respectful. "No, James," I said, taking the glass. "Check on the boy. Make sure the nanny has everything she needs." "He is fast asleep," Sir James said. "He didn't wake up once." "Good," I said. "Go to bed, James. It has been a long night." "Thank you, sir." "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, James." I walked alone through the massive house. My footsteps on the marble were the only sound. I walked past the library, past the dining room, past the portraits of strangers that came with the house. Tomorrow I would take them down. I would put up new photos, photos of Leo, photos of the life we were going to build. I opened the French doors to the main balcony and stepped out into the night. The cold was biting. It was the kind of cold that snaps your lungs open and makes you feel alive. The snow was falling heavily now, thick white flakes that were slowly covering the tire tracks of the BMW. The scars in the earth where Jason had bottomed out his car were disappearing, buried under a layer of pure white. Nature was cleaning up the mess just as I had. I walked to the stone railing and looked out over the valley. The city lights twinkled below me, a grid of electricity and ambition. Somewhere down there in a cold police station holding cell, my daughter was being processed. Somewhere down there, Jason was trying to explain to a public defender how he lost $200,000. Somewhere down there, the elder Whitmores were sitting in a hotel room blaming everyone but themselves. I took a sip of the scotch. It warmed my chest. I expected to feel guilt. I searched for it inside myself. I looked for the pang of regret, the voice of a father saying, "You went too far." I couldn't find it. All I found was relief. It was a vast ocean of relief. For 5 years I had been holding my breath, walking on eggshells, pretending to be less than I was, just to keep the peace. I had let them insult me. I had let them use me. I had let them treat me like a senile inconvenience. I exhaled, watching my breath plume in the air. I was done pretending. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a sharp, violent vibration against my leg. I knew who it was before I looked. Only one person would have the audacity to try to reach me now. I pulled the phone out. The screen was bright in the darkness. A text message from Brittany. It was a long message. A wall of text. Dad, I know you are angry. I know we messed up. But please, you have to understand we were desperate. The pressure, it made us do crazy things. We are family, Dad. You can't just leave us like this. I am scared. They are talking about bail. I don't have money for bail. Please, Dad. Just this once. I promise I will change. I promise I will be the daughter you wanted. Just answer me, please. I read the words. I analyzed them like a contract. There was no accountability. There was no admission of the malice in her voice on that recording. There was only fear and manipulation. She wasn't sorry she hurt me. She was sorry she got caught. She was sorry the bank of Dad had finally closed its doors. She was still trying to play the game. She thought if she pressed the right buttons, if she used the right words, I would fold. She thought I was still the old man in the apartment. She didn't know that man was gone. I looked at the reply button. My thumb hovered over it. I could type a lecture. I could tell her exactly why she was wrong. I could tell her that change isn't a promise, it is an action over time. But that would be engagement. That would be giving her what she wanted. Attention. A lifeline. A connection. I didn't want to be connected anymore. I wanted to be free. I tapped the top of the screen. I opened the contact settings. I scrolled down to the bottom. Block caller. I pressed it. A confirmation box popped up. You will no longer receive calls or messages from this contact. I pressed confirm. The screen refreshed. The messages were gone. The thread was dead. I did the same for Jason. I did the same for Mrs. Whitmore. I did the same for Mr. Whitmore. One by one, I severed the digital tendrils they had wrapped around my life. With each tap, I felt lighter. With each block, I felt the air in my lungs get cleaner. I put the phone back in my pocket. It was just a piece of glass and metal now. It wasn't a leash anymore. I looked back out at the snow. The world was silent. The wind had died down. I was 71 years old. Most men my age were winding down. They were looking backward, counting their regrets, waiting for the end. I took a long, slow drink of the scotch, finishing the glass. I felt a surge of energy, a fire in my belly that I hadn't felt since I started my first company 40 years ago. I wasn't ending. I was beginning. I had a grandson to raise. I had a business empire to run. I had a foundation to build. I had $25 million of real estate to enjoy. I turned away from the railing and looked back at the house. My house. The warm light spilled out from the library, where I would read bedtime stories to Leo. The kitchen was stocked. The staff was loyal. The future was wide open. I smiled. It wasn't a polite smile. It was a wolf smile. I had walked into the fire, and I had burned everything down, and from the ashes I had built a fortress. I opened the French doors and stepped back into the warmth. I locked the doors behind me. I turned the deadbolt. It made a solid, heavy click. The cold was outside. The past was outside. I was inside. And I was finally home. This story teaches us a brutal but necessary truth: generosity without boundaries is not love. It is self-destruction. We often believe that family deserves endless chances, but Conrad's journey proves that true family is defined by respect, not blood, By hiding his wealth, he inadvertently revealed the true character of those around him. His final act was not revenge, but a necessary correction. It reminds us that we teach people how to treat us. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop the flow of support, to let those you love finally learn to stand on their own, even if they must fall first. If you enjoyed this story of justice, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Would you have forgiven Brittany, or did she get exactly what she deserved?